1. Rebirth, Rewrite. The _bip_boop 2003. / I will rewrite everything from the ground up, it was bad, extremely so. I hope this one will be better, and I will delete every other chapter before this one in 1 or 2 days. In a hospital room of Canoe General Hospital in the middle of the night, a black-haired woman in her mid-20s was giving birth. It's a beautiful baby girl, a nurse announced, mildly shocked and perturbed by the look of the baby to the exhausted woman now a mother. The baby was not particularly ugly compared to other babies, but the pair of bony protrusions on her head that looked like cat ears but in the form of horns and a soft tuft of pink hair made the baby girl stand out. Then as the baby opened her eyes, 2 beautiful ruby red eyes observed their surroundings, and suddenly the black pupil inside of them turned to pinprick before a shrill and piercing cry escaped the baby. This wasn't a fucking dream, was the thought of the baby before she was given to the mother and against her consent nearly instantly fell asleep. 10 months later. The pink-haired baby named Keed was staring at the slowly spinning musical cribs. Her eyes filled with contradicting feelings. Even after all this time. It's hard to digest that I died and have a second chance at life, Keed thought. Indeed she was not in her first life, she reincarnated. She remembered how she died, how absurd it was, and how it pissed her off, aggrieved her, and angered her. She was walking to the veterinarian clinic. She was working as a veterinary radiologist when she heard a speeding car, turning her, and she was met with a tire from the car and it slammed into her face. Her neck did a 180 degrees turn in the wrong direction after all, not that she was aware of that. Evidently, she died on the spot, but that did not stop her from feeling for even the briefest of time pain on a level she could have never imagined, felt and despair at the realization of her imminent death. Saying she was happy about being reincarnated would be the understatement of the century, yet it was still extremely hard, strange, and perturbing. First, being a fully aware baby with all of the pros and cons for someone who was 29 in her last life was all but normal. Her parent was younger than her in her past life, and to boot she rapidly discovered that she was not a he anymore. This was not of real importance at the moment, but she was aware that it will be, and it was not like she hated being on the fairer sex now. Keed was just puzzled about how she should feel about it, a new life, a new perspective on things. It was a change she did not ask for, but again, what right did she have to complain? She died because she was at the wrong place, wrong time. If there was any higher force responsible for her rebirth, she was grateful toward them. For her it was unlike what she read in novels and fanfiction, it was real. Putting her hand in her mouth she felt her teeth. She had just recently finished teething and it was quite unpleasant, but that meant her food choice will have more variety besides microwaved milk and admittedly majorly unlikable mushy baby food. Then her hand moved to the 2 bony protrusions on her head. The horn, for lack of any comparison, were smoothly shaped like cat ears and extremely sensitive to touch. It was unlike any malformation she heard of, and as a veterinary radiologist she did see a lot of such cases, majorly thanks to inbreeding, but that's another story. They felt right, as if they should be here. It wasn't the only strange thing about her body. Her vibrant pink hair was for her alien, and the fact it looked 100% only amplified this feeling. Frankly, it baffled her that it was even possible. Then there were her ruby red eyes. She admitted they were enchanting and beautiful, but also completely alien. Keed seriously doubted she was human, but besides those physical aspects, she didn't feel like she was something else but human. Her parents looked perfectly human too, even if neither of them had pink hair or ruby red iris. Both had black hair and brown eyes. It made her question things, but at least she was 100% her mom was her biological mother. Not that it mattered, she liked both of her parents. Yeah, it was too soon to call it familial love, but one thing was for sure is that they loved her back. Even if she was strange, kids even younger than her were abandoned for far less. She was also conflicted on how she should feel about her new parents, but decided to not overthink too much on that part, and that her mom and dad of her past life would be okay, or even encouraged to love her new parents. Those same physical characteristics made her remember an anime she saw in her past life when she was 13 or 14 about a girl with pink hair, red eyes, and a tendency for mass murder with strange invisible arms. Besides this, she didn't remember much of the plot or any characters for that matter. Anyway, she was not going to cross the possibility of being the same thing as that girl, a Diclonius or something they were called. The possibility was there, but at that point, it only was a coincidence until proven otherwise, and again beside her unique appearance she felt perfectly human with no magical hand and powers or cheat whatsoever. She also did not know where besides on alternate Earth in Japan where she reincarnated and if she should worry about things outside of the norm. Yawning and stretching her little body, Keed started to feel drowsy and rapidly fell into the world of dreams. Her parents were lucky that she rarely ever cried and as such did not have the full and true experience of being young parents. 2 months later and it was her first birthday, she was dressed in a fuchsia dress for babies she disliked. In front of her was her mother, Hoshiko, and her father, Tauri waiting for her to blow out the candle after they finished singing a butchered version of Happy Birthday to You. One thing quite strange was that at no point in time did she see either of her parents bring friends or family members. The same goes for her getting to see the outside which besides going to the hospital for a checkup, nothing. There clearly was something unusual going on but nothing to get any meaningful conclusion of. She also was forbidden from watching TV. Do they realize if it wasn't me as their kid they would have waited here until the entire candle melted on the cake, she thought clearly baffled by the lack of common sense of both. Key did not hide that she was smarter than her physical age would suggest. She could speak since she was 9 months old, of course, she was not fluent, even now far from it but that was still mind-boggling for a kid her age. Her first word was, fuck, at 7 months old, she did not have a clue of what it meant at the time. When she learned what it meant she repeated as much as she wanted without any repercussions. 2. Life is good. A 5-year-old girl with long messy pink hair and red ribbons tied around her horns could be seen doing advanced algebra while lying on her bed. This was Keed. Nearly finished, Keed thought with a small smile. She was not the biggest fan of math in her past life, it cost her an entire year of college but here it felt almost like a game. It was her idea to do that. Well, at the start when she was barely 2 years old and was bored to death she asked to learn things. This rapidly escalated as she showed progressively more of her intelligence, but still never forgot she was a child and that there were things she should not magically know or understand. This was not new for her parents that she was a genius. Her mom was the most euphoric and enthusiastic about this of the pair, making her not go to kindergarten, which Keed was infinitely grateful for. In fact, she was homeschooled. It will save her from many inconveniences such as physically going to school, stupid people, and bullying, because of many different reasons, one being her horns. Even if they could be hidden behind a haircut with 2 buns, they would at some point be discovered. And going to school was something she was happy to not do, besides the fact that it would be rather pointless to her. A waste of time and money. And even potentially dangerous. Was it paranoia? Yes, but a healthy dose of paranoia never hurt. Another thing why she was putting so much effort so young was to be better, smarter. The first years of life play a fundamental role in the brain development of a child and as such their future. Essentially she was with the idea of using research and experience she read about in her past life of parents, scientists in particular who intellectually nurtured their children from a young age to make geniuses of them. Often with dubious morals, such as how the child genius Williams James Cedes was made, or at least partially made. The purpose was to stimulate her brain and increase the already exceptional level of neuronal connection of a child. Mind you, she was no neurologist or expert on how the brain works, she knew way more than the average but that was it. But it worked, slowly and surely but it did and it was a euphoric feeling to actively be able to tell the difference from one year to another. In the first place she felt that her memories in this life were somewhat better, so doing what she did was only beneficial. And if it did not have any real impact on the structure of her brain and its influence on her intelligence in the end she would have ended up smarter and with more knowledge either way. This was without the obvious of how the fuck she didn't become brain with the mind of a 29 years old male in the undeveloped brain of a baby. And how it impacted her development. Sadly, besides putting it on soul and esoteric stuff nothing much could be said. Maybe it was even the reason why she looked like an albino girl with pink hair and horns, who knows. But the fact that she could somewhat think coherently in the last few months of when she was in the womb even if it was more of an acid dream was mind-boggling enough. Anyway, she discovered that she was in the world of Tokyo Ghoul or one scarcely similar to this one. Not the worst world she could have ended up in, but in any case, it was bad news. And it wouldn't be fun if it weren't the case, wouldn't it? She knew that ghouls were not inherently monsters the same way humans weren't either, even if even her parents told her that. But saying ghouls were not more dangerous to humans than any other species besides humans themselves and mosquitoes, of course, would be lying. Prey defending themselves is natural. The possibility of ending up as some ghoul dinner was very real. Frankly, man-eating humanoids capable of hiding within any human society in plain sight were, simply put, terrifying. Coexistence between the two species was quite literally the silliest thing imaginable if it were to be put on something greater than a small group. She remembered from somewhere it was how the manga ended. Humans can't even support the presence of one another if they have a slight difference in beliefs, ideas, or melanin concentration in their skin. Or they start conflict for a plethora of other reasons, some justifiable and some not. So another entire sapient species just as varied. Even worse when said species can exclusively feed on human flesh, prey on them, but can also drink coffee for some reason. As far as she knew, she seemed pretty human. Yet the possibility of her being not truly human was still on her mind. She remarked that she never got any disease, but this could be put to her lack of interaction with the outside, and she healed fast, nothing exceptional, but for example, a paper cut would disappear in less than a minute. This she didn't let anybody know, but otherwise, she didn't feel like she had any powers or anything that much special about her besides the unique appearance that she somewhat grew accustomed to. Stretching her body, Keed walked out of her room. Moving down the corridor, she arrived in the kitchen to see her dad, Tauri, preparing dinner. Oh. So it's curry today. Nice, she thought. It was one of her favorite meals, not that she was a picky eater. The only thing she truly hated was coffee in all of its shapes and form. One morning she saw her mom drink some and asked to taste. A different body, different taste was what Keed thought. And what she got was a trip to animation, such as her allergic response. Oh, Keed, would you mind bringing me the onion? 3 or 4 please, her dad asked with a gentle smile on his face. His life couldn't be any better, a loving wife with a genius daughter and the comfort of an apartment not far from CCG headquarters. Tauri worked as a cook in a restaurant not even 2 minutes away from the CCG headquarters. Dad, she responded and did as instructed. She came back not even 30 seconds later with a bag containing 4 onions. As per usual, she walked on the stool that put her at a height to help. Peeling off the outer layer of skin and giving the onions to her dad for him to cut them and hide how it made him cry, Keed smiled. As daunting as the future would be, the present moment was relaxing. And she knew that moments, as casual as they are important. Life is. 3 years later. See, it looks good on you, Hochoki said to her daughter, Keed, who was glaring before she sighed. Her mom was right, but that didn't mean she had to like it. Keed turned her head to the mirror of her room and was met with her reflection. An 8-year-old girl of Japanese descent, her long pink hair, one tuft of hair on each side of her face, red ribbons on her horns with hair to hide them, her annoyed ruby-red eyes accompanied by a small frown on her face. And her clothing was composed of a pair of light pink leggings, a skirt, and a shirt of the same color but with red accents on the sleeve and border of the skirt. She admitted that she looked cute and it was a pretty dress, but that reminded her of the fact that she was a she. Normally she chooses her clothes, but being a child, even one like her, meant she needed to obey her parents to a certain degree. And fighting for the clothes she should wear was just pointless, and she would have lost anyway, and it was extremely childish. Accepting you have been bested is sometimes necessary. I can't wait for puberty, Keed thought with sarcasm and no small amount of dread. She knew what awaited her. Maybe it's an overreaction, at worst she could count on her mom, even if it will be fucking strange for her to ask about this aspect of life even without considering that she was a male before. No, in fact, it will make things stranger for her. As to why her mother forced her to dress this way. To take a family picture, nothing more, and after that probably go to the park, a place Keed particularly liked. She always liked nature. It wasn't really nature, but that was the closest you could get in Tokyo. And so 36 of pictures were taken of Keed and her parents, where the girl admittedly tried to seem as happy as possible, which earned a thankful smile from her mother, who knew she disliked wearing those clothes and even more be seen with them. particularly in public. Walking down the path in the park, Keed hummed, the still cold wind of spring barely affecting her. Her parents were not far and she always stayed within a line of sight within and range where her yell could be heard. Stranger danger, was her motto, even more so when you are a kid, and even if it seems narcissistic, she was far from ugly. Her age even helped some twisted individuals to want her. Approaching a murder of crows composed of 3 crows, she crouches down and tilts her head to the side. Whistling, she grabbed the attention of a crow with 1 digit less on its left leg. She helped it at some point and now they were kind of friends. She didn't know if it was male or female because both were practically identical, only a DNA test will tell, but she still named Aquamarine. The origin of the name is how its plumage will reflect a blue hue when in direct sunlight. Crows were one of her favorite animals, for several reasons, one being their intelligence, and she found them to be quite pretty. Come, Keed mumbled, and the crow skipped in her direction, croaking it let itself be scratched by her hand. Picking it, she sat down, her back against the trunk of a tree. She was still in the line of sight of her parents. Both are not the biggest fans of the fact that their daughter is playing with wild animals. In fact, they were pretty vocal in their disapproval of it. She still managed to convince them she couldn't have a pet at home or even a fish, and to be honest, she felt a tad lonely at times. It was her fault if she was alone, and she acknowledged it. She avoided kids her age, equally for both gender, as for in those 2 cases it could get pretty weird. To get hit on by a 9-year-old boy when you have the mind of a straight adult male with no pedophile tendency, this type of stuff. And also the great difference in maturity and intelligence. Frankly, she could speak to no one, even when she tried at her moment in the park. She was too young for people that she could talk to, and not dumb enough to talk to kids her age. Even if people older than her deigned to talk to her, besides the occasional granny and teenager fawning over her cuteness, sometimes even tourists, and she will speak to them in their native languages, she found people, not to say dumb, but scarily lacking in knowledge that she thought of as basic and common sense, such as the latest research in RC cells. She was like an alien, adding that she had a pet crow only added salt to the injury. The most ironic aspect of it all was that it was not far from the truth. If not the truth, she just wasn't aware of it as of yet. And that she was the one lacking in common sense, a fact she was aware of but childishly didn't want to acknowledge. It was their fault if they didn't want to learn. Speaking, she might have become a tad addicted to it. 2 years later, Keed suddenly woke up. She was thirsty, and so in her white pajamas, she opened the door of her room. Her sleepy eyes acclimated to the darkness as she weaved through the corridor. Did Dad forget to close the door again? It's the 3rd time this month, the 10-year-old girl thought, exasperated. It was not rare. Her dad was forgetful at times and clumsy, but that was who he was. Her mother was working, and as such only the 2 of them were home. She closed the door and continued on her way to the kitchen. Once inside, she switched the light on, serving herself a glass of water and a snack in the form of a piece of black chocolate. Then she froze. Something bad was going to happen, and not even 5 seconds later she heard the ringing, loud and piercing sound of a gunshot resonating through the entire apartment. The glass in her hand fell and broke as it impacted the ground. Her mind blanked out for what felt like an eternity. She, in a fit of utter panic, ran straight to the door and was going to lock herself up in the kitchen. Ah, that is the child the good doctor wanted. And trying to lock yourself up. How adorable. Go on, either way, you can't run away from me. I know what it feels. I did run too. A shiver ran down her spine as the voice of a young man echoed through the apartment. This spurred her to move even faster as she locked the door. Keed then took a knife and hid under the counter. That was the best she could think of at the moment, and there weren't many hiding places, with only one entrance and exit. This can't be real, she thought. Tears were welling up. She wanted to deny it, but it was real and she knew it. She was frightened. Another gunshot was followed by 3 others, each making her flinch with how loud they were and making her ears ring. A metallic clink, the door opening, then calm footsteps. Her ear rang one more time as a bullet hole was made in the door of the counter she was hiding. The door was flung open and she was forcefully taken out before she could even yell. Held in the air by her hand. The man was crushing her hand, then her eyes met his own. Next to half-molten and ripped skin were eyes of a different color. One with a brown pupil and dilated vein popping out and the other with blood-red pupils and a black scara with red cracks in the skin around. At that moment something deep within Keed snapped. Awakening. Something in Keed snapped, and she felt freer than she ever was, for invisible woman's hands flowed out of her back. She felt great. She felt complete in a unique way, something she missed but didn't realize until now. Her demeanor shifted, from crying as squirming helpless little to something fundamentally different. It wasn't a coincidence. "I'm not human and never was," Keed mumbled, barely audible, the emotions in her eyes becoming colder before being replaced by pure and calm fury, all ounces of fear long since gone. Fully understanding what she was. "Oh. Yeah, angry ain't that see you dash." The man didn't have time to finish as the fingers of his hand that were holding Keed flew out. She sliced all 5 fingers into tiny pieces and it was followed blood spewed from the hand in abandon. Falling to the ground. Keed caught herself up and massaged her wrist, the red mark of a hand on her skin with blood that wasn't her own on her skin. She gazed at the man clutching his fingerless hand, the blood slowly stopped flowing. He wasn't smiling anymore. His malformed face with his mouth covered turned to confusion, amusement, then anger. Taking out his gun the man yelled and started to shoot, 1, 2, 3, 4, until emptied the entire magazine and only the useless clicks of the hammer could be heard. None of the bullets ever so much as touched a hair. Keed, her eyes could see the rapidly approaching projecting and her vectors moved on instinct, all bullets fell to the ground, clinking as they did so, crushed right before her face. His anger reached new heights as everything unfolded before his disbelieving eyes. "I will kill you." She ignored his senseless babbling about how it shouldn't have been like this and said in a cold and matter-of-fact tone. She wanted to kill him, it was an urge, a want, a need from the deepest part of her being. A hunger for death, one that always was present but was hidden. Her everything screamed at her to do so and she happily complied. Moving one of her 4 new invisible members as if she always had them, it zipped and gripped the man by the neck, suffocating him and stopping any attempt to talk. While all the time she kept eye contact. The man squirmed, desperately trying to grip the intangibles, an invisible hand choking, clawing his neck with his only good hand. He then kicked the ground as he was lifted from the ground. Keed marveled at the sensation of her vectors moving, but the reality of what this man just did and wanted to do only extended her anger, the tear on her cheeks only amplifying it. "Why?" she asked the man, her hold on his neck strengthening, and his fingerless hand flew cleanly cut off. He squirmed even harder, blood falling in great quantity on the ground. "Why did you do this?" she asked again, her crimson red eyes focused on his human eyes and Kakugan. She didn't want any vocal answer or to hear his voice for that matter. At this moment the how and why he was a half-ghoul was not at the forefront of her mind, the lack of a Kagun confused her. The man clearly had enhanced regeneration and strength, but that seemed to be it, and his overall body didn't look fine, it looked mutated and wrong, already on the verge of death. Without awaiting an answer, the 4 vectors moved by her will as she approached, her bare feet walking on the still warm blood. She cut his feet, he cried, letting the hold on his neck go as he fell on his back. Eyes pinprick filled with terror, she slowly walked toward him as he desperately tried to crawl away from her, the bloody stumps at the end of his legs scraping on the ground while his yell, sobs, moan, and cry filled with fear and anguish. His current state brought a twisted sense of pleasure to her being but didn't quench her anger or calm her down. "Aowa. My arm gave it back to me. It hurts," he yelled as the arm he used to crawl was not cut, but twisted until the bones broke, the skin and flesh twisted until in a violent and gory spectacle it popped right off. This was followed by further cries of agony as the young Diclonius twisted each of his members and tore them off until only a blood torso and a head remained. The man's status as a failed experiment for the transplant of Ghoul's organs is the only reason he was barely hanging on. He shouldn't have taken the strange offer of a doctor at the hospital he was at but should have let himself die of his cancer. His chest irregularly moved up and down, his lidless eyes staring right into the eyes of Keed filled with emotions he was too delirious to take notice of. The pain was too vivid for him to fall unconscious and Keed would not have let that happen either way. All around them were pieces of flesh and skin, fragments of bones, and the smell of blood was thick in the air and overpowering everything else. His disfigured face caused another wave of rage to go through her being, and with one final wave of her vectors, she cut the man vertically in two from the top of the head to the pelvis, ending his life for good. Breathing slowly, Keed mindlessly walked out, but she caught a glimpse of something shining around a half-digested finger within the cut-open stomach of the body. Dad's wedding ring, she thought. Around a half-digested finger was a simple but elegant silver ring she instantly recognized. Her vision turned red and her vectors exploded out of her back. An elderly voice of a woman she knew since she was 2 years made her snap out of her rage-filled frenzy, and she gazed upon the destruction and bloodshed she had caused in a 4-meter radius around her. The only area not damaged was where she was on her knees, breathing heavily, and where the ring was. The body was now a bloody pulp, the ground filled with deep lacerations, the Kaylee, and all were not spared. Her head slowly turned to the side of the voice, and a vector flew right in the old woman's direction, only stopping a meter. Unknowingly avoiding an abrupt death. Keed? Sweetheart, is that you? I heard a strange voice from above. Are you alright? What happened? Oh my God, Aoi, the old woman, their neighbor and friend, said, beyond horrified as she saw the little girl she used to give wagashi slowly standing up covered in blood from head to toe. 5. Future. The cloud of anger that muddled Keed's more logical side rapidly disappeared as she realized what would have happened if her strange invisible had just a bit more range. Willing her vectors in her back. The old lady was a woman she loved and thought of as the grandma-like figure she didn't have in this life and her last life for that matter. She was a sweet, caring, headstrong, silly, and brutally honest woman. The image of that same old lady, Aoi, dead, eviscerated with her guts spilled on the floor tile, her head decapitated. Horror filled her mind at what she nearly did, yet a small part of her being was disappointed it didn't happen to solidify this sensation of horror. Her scarlet eyes focused on the puddle of blood and flesh around. She recalled every moment, every feeling, every sensation, the visceral joy she felt as she shredded the man apart like he was a dog chew toy. It was entirely deserved, and she didn't feel anything but utter disgust at the dead man. No remorse or guilt at the act of torturing and taking the man's life. But she couldn't lie to herself, she shouldn't have felt such positive emotion at the act of killing, yet she did. Not only that, but it felt right in a very deep and twisted way. The idea of killing, be it humans, ghouls, and all in between, excited a new instinct in her to no end. When she acknowledged not being human, it was a moment filled with intense and chaotic emotions, not letting her time, brainpower, or mindset, to fully understand and digest the full implication. But now she could, and it hit hard. This also made her remember random moments where she had murderous thoughts toward random people on the street, from babies to old people, but she shrugged them off, not thinking much of them. This wasn't new, since her rebirth these instincts were there, just buried and muffled. Ignored even. Her second life not even had truly begun and was flipped upside down, all her plans for the future crumbled before her eyes. What will happen to her? Aoi must have already called her mom and the authorities, which boiled down to the same things. Her mom was a chief inspector of the TMPD, Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. There was the involvement of a ghoul or whatever that abomination was. Either way, the CCG will intervene. And she was part of the incident, having killed the man. Nobody of her knew that, giving her an edge. No one will believe a defenseless little girl could do that without extremely convincing evidence. Her not being human will inevitably get out, and ink could only get you so far, if it wasn't already the case. Since this doctor was interested in her, which he or she knows about what makes her unique, she would find them and they were going to die. It also put her mom in danger. There was so much to think about, so much to plan and be paranoid of, it was suffocating. She didn't ask for any of that. A simple and peaceful life was all she wanted, but clearly, she wasn't going to have that. The incoming future will be hard and extremely bloody, which she was sure of. At least she wasn't a defenseless preteen anymore. Gazing up at the blinking light bulb and destruction of the kitchen, she stood up, careful to not slip on the blood or pieces of flesh. Looking at the scarred old lady, she was going to speak when the sound of a door being smashed open entered her ears. Mom, Ken thought, recognizing one of the voices as the one of her mother. Posing, she thought about what was going to happen next, and with mixed feelings in her heart she ran at the voice. She needed someone, support, a pillar, someone she fully trusted. Her feet left bloody footprints on the floor as she exited the kitchen. Stunning Aoi who could but stare at where the girl once was. Arriving at the entrance she was met with her mother in her civilian clothing, a gun in her hand. Next to her was a man and woman also with guns. She didn't know them but from their uniform they were cops. A bit earlier. The first thing Hoshiko noticed when she entered her home was the familiar pungent scent of blood, making her imagine the worst. The second was this invisible tension in pending silence. The phone call she received made her incredibly worried. Her internal turmoil was broken by the distressed voice of her daughter. Mom! The dad was killed. Keed cried upon arriving at the entrance, arms open. She latched at her mother's waist and started to babble incoherently amid sobs. It wasn't acting on Keed's part. Shoo, calm down. I'm here, everything will be alright. You're safe. No one is going to hurt you, Hoshiko said in a soothing voice, crouching down to hug her daughter tightly, her mind filled with fear, shock, apprehension, and so much more emotions that she didn't let out. At the same time, she made a head gesture telling the two next to act and call for reinforcement. She arrived here as fast as she could, probably breaking several rules, but she could care less. Her family came first. And like this, Keed cried herself to sleep in her mother's embrace. On a hospital bed, Cade slowly woke up with the smell of chemicals found in the hospital, the ray of the sun hitting her right in the face. Groaning, she put her back higher against the end of the bed and groggily opened her eyes. She stared blankly at the white wall. Getting her legs out of the blanket she hugged her knees, a bandage on one of her wrists, while the fresh memories of what happened flashed in her mind. A tear rolled down her cheek. Dad died and I'm a monster, she mumbled, a depressing chuckle almost leaving her. Thinking of the invisible hands, one like a limb she always had snaked out of her back, phasing through the wall, she made it appear in her vision. Flexing each of the fingers, it was a surreal sensation yet at the same time natural. She had an innate control over it, bringing the three others. She smiled slightly. Let's what the shitty future of this fucking world holds in store for me, she said, this time a chuckle leaving her. She will survive. 6. CCG's Reaper. It has been an hour since Keed has awakened. She was blankly staring at the wall for other people but herself, with the occasional movement of her eyes, rarely ever blinking, probably making her look mental. Which, to be fair, from a human perspective wouldn't be far from the truth. Not like it would be out of the norm for a child to have lived through what she did and act this way. If only I had awakened them earlier, she thought with mixed feelings. Sadly, it was the past. Nothing could undo it, and she was rational enough to know her dad wouldn't want her to dwell on his death to the point of harming herself and others, even if it happened in the form of mutilating his murderer to the point he was more paced than whatever he was supposed to be. She knew where her mom was, and thanks to a letter written in her mom's handwriting, she was sleeping at a motel nearby because the hospital rule forbade visits after a certain hour. Keed in fact hated that fact. She didn't want to be here at all. At the moment she was moving her 4 2-meter-long invisible arms, she dubbed them vectors. It was a strange sensation, it was new limbs, and she had an instinctive understanding of them. All of them could be moved to her will independently with surgical precision with little to no real mental strain, though she put that on the fact she was doing very simple movements. More complicated ones will require training, better understanding, and concentration. Not only that, but her horns, while she used her vectors, felt very similar to muscles flexing. It was hard to describe, but with that in mind she could extrapolate that like a muscle it could become stronger. And she was but a preteen, as such deducing that this muscle will also naturally become stronger was but logical. Depending on how fast and the way she made them vibrate, they could change property, from tangible capable of grabbing objects, to intangible capable of going through organic and inorganic matter alike and even becoming akin to a very rough molecular blade. All of this she tested under the cover and below the pillow, hidden from sight. Because a healthy dose of paranoia never hurts, and she knew she would need any and all advantage she could get even if minimal. Just the fact she was in a hospital was already bad. What she discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The potential was enormous, if not nigh infinite, as long as she played it smartly. All her vectors vanished inside her back as she heard the door opening. Her head instinctively snapped at the direction of the noise and her ruby-red eyes focused on a small woman with straight but slightly messy black hair and glasses hiding heavy eye bags. It was a nurse. A human, a murderous streak flashed in Keed's mind, surprising and horrifying her, not the idea of killing. Far from it. Even if she knows it should, she felt a lack of restraint toward that aspect, a thirst for killing in fact, and that was what horrified her. What would she become if she let go and caved to this new primal and animalistic instinct? The nurse smiled softly as she saw the little girl awake and seemingly in full health, yet the horned girl's stare made her uncomfortable and felt a sense of danger she couldn't understand. Cade, noticing that, stopped and smiled, making the nurse think of what she felt about her lack of sleep. She was running on caffeine and pure will, also why she didn't particularly register the horn. Not like it was the strangest thing she saw in her life. "Oh, you're finally awake. You must be famished. Would you like me to call someone to bring you breakfast?" "Don't worry, today's food is palatable." "You don't have any allergies, do you?" the nurse asked softly, after that she was going to take a 1-hour nap. Keed nodded for the breakfast and said no to coffee, or anything with even a nanogram of this abomination in it. 15 minutes later the door was opened again, and a tall man in his mid-twenties with a white trench coat entered, a metallic suitcase in one hand while a plastic tray with food in the other. Bored gray eyes behind a pair of thin and elegant rectangular glasses, widening dark blue hair, and a cold, borderline emotionless handsome face. Their eyes met and Keed instinctively tensed up. She recognized who that was, the strongest CCG agent if her memories were correct. Not that she knew every detail and information about the anime and manga, but she also didn't know which one she was, not that it mattered. Her existence destroyed it and made her canon knowledge more than shaky. She wasn't a ghoul, but neither was she human, and neither was he human, or at least fully human, which meant she was right. Apparently, she could instinctively know if someone wasn't human. How? But she didn't have clues at the moment. He is half human after all. A fascinating and extremely rare occurrence was the copulation between a ghoul and a human that gave birth to a hybrid. Less rare than half ghouls, half humans were still a curiosity, as RC cells were. Extremely interesting from every biological standpoint, particularly the various diseases on the hybrid, but it wasn't the time for that. Why the fuck is he here, she thought, her rational and logical side keeping her in check, as he wouldn't do anything to her since this is a hospital and it wouldn't make sense. At least that is what she hoped. "Good morning, I'm Kisho Arima, a special class ghoul investigator. Here is your breakfast, rice, miso soup, and smoked salmon," the man said, placing the tray on the overbed table before sitting on a chair in front of the pink-haired girl. The moment he approached she had the possibility and urge to cut his head off, her vector stopping right at the neck, leaving a barely noticeable cut. She refrained herself, maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't. Either of the two options was bad, but killing was still the worst of the two. Kisho's eyes widened a little as he took out a handkerchief to clean the droplet of blood off his neck. She could have killed him, how he didn't know, and in his opinion probably didn't either, as smart as the report said she was. In the end, she was but a traumatized little girl, one with a very strong front. His lips formed a thin smile that Keed noticed. Indeed, it was a good idea to come after he got the information of a horned girl with an odd RC cell count related to a strange accident. The air was tense, making her particularly uncomfortable. A CCG agent, one unrelated to her in her hospital room, should have broken at least a few laws, but he was a high-ranked member of an organization that was pretty much the government. Laws were only taken into consideration when convenient. And the CCG was far from not being corrupted or controlled by humans for that matter. Keed broke this tension by starting to eat the smoked salmon with the chopsticks, eating a third of it in one gulp. After having dipped it in soy sauce she spoke. "So Mr. Arime, why are you here? Isn't it illegal?" She cut straight to the point. Baffling the man with her attitude and question, his smile grew and he spoke. "Keed Izumi, sex female, a 10-year-old child, born on the 1st of May, in the year 2001 in Kanu General Hospital, of Japanese nationality, blood type AB+, latest IQ test revealed a score of 199, a passion for biology where she excels, physical characteristic, 2 horns on each side of her head, pink hair, pale skin, crimson eyes. And a negative result at the RC cell test. A case was never seen in the CCG's history, Kicho said as if he was talking about the weather. Having someone talk this way about your personal information was unpleasant, and sickening in a way. It also meant they must know way more and that she didn't like but the last tidbit of information. Negative? No, null result at the RC cell test. Negative. Interesting choice of word, she thought, perplexed. RC cells were found in all humans, their quantities and consecration in certain being one of the most noticeable differences between them and ghouls. Various theories suggested that they are in a way indispensable for even humans to live. She needed information about what she was, and fast. I will be direct with you, Keed, the Commission of Counter Ghoul is interested in your person. 7. Spiraling downward. Interested in my person, Keed repeated curiously, head tilted, her messy pink hair falling over one of her eyes, her gaze never faltering from the ghoul investigator. These words meant many things, all negative in their own way for the horned girl but to various degrees. Putting rice in her mouth she ate and awaited patiently for his response. You have been invited to join one of our academies, the most prestigious of the 7 in fact, and as an honor student, Kisho Arima said calmly with his usual poker face back on. Inching closer, the face of the girl became blank. And he felt an unexplainable wind whip against his face, damaging his glasses beyond which he immediately changed for a new undamaged pair he took from the inside his trench coat. 2 times. 2 times I felt this close to the cold touches of death. 2 times by this little horned girl. Incredible, terrifying for whoever has her ire, the Reaper of the CCG thought, remembering the puddle once man who killed her father. Plans for the future in his mind and the way it morphed into the one he had with the one-eyed owl. Which also reminded him he will need to inform her about this new variable. Oh, this seemingly harmless prepubescent girl would play a big role in the future, that much he could tell, a new species, the first of her species. That was an obvious conclusion, from her medical record, the various ultrasound, radiography, and blood tests and the drastic difference compared to before in them, and her appearance, even if the horn could be easily hidden. The CCG already had eyes on her, but it was for a very different reason. It was on the fact Keed was a genius than on her unusual appearance. Malformation happened after all, and crazier ones than a pair of cat-ear-like horns. One species with at this point unknown and mysterious capabilities. One that will break the status quo between prey and predator, between ghouls and humans. A third party. Invited him. I don't really have a choice, do I, Mr. Special Ghoul Investigator? The girl spoke bluntly with barely contained anger and resignation, showing that she perfectly understood her current predicament. He understood how she could feel to a certain degree, but her tone and the snarky comment made him frown ever so slightly. However, speaking to her was similar to speaking to an adult, not surprising considering her intelligence, but it was clear she was also a kid. And she was lucky he was the first to get to the scene once the police called the CCG, otherwise, Keed might have been already in a hidden CCG laboratory or the sunlit garden as some breeding cattle, or worse, her mother killed and everyone knowing her erased from the record. And this made his blood boil. The Washu would never have her, he would make sure nobody could, even himself. What he did pissed off many high-placed people in the association, but what could they do? Nothing. He was too important, too strong, too smart, but also very loyal to them. But it wasn't a loss, far from that, it just wasn't the optimal result of this unexpected situation they would like. Sighing, Arima simply nodded at the girl. Before leaving the hospital room he said, "Do not worry, I will do my best to protect you and your mother from the one in the shadow." The following week was unpleasant for both Keed and her mom. They didn't sleep in their apartment for an evident reason, so they were forced to sleep at the old lady, Always place. The funeral of her dad passed 2 days after she left the hospital, and it was hard. After all this time in this world, it was her real dad, and she loved him. At least she partially avenged him, but it wasn't nearly enough for her. Not even close. But the most affected was her mom. She was overworking herself to the bone and in clear depression. She slept less because of regular night terrors and was rapidly losing weight. At least she wasn't scared of her own daughter or was lying to herself about what happened and in denial. Even then Keed was sure she wouldn't be afraid of what she was, that what she dearly believed, though she didn't reveal what she was to her mom. For reasons, the preteen girl with even the experience from her past life has a man in his late 20s failed to truly understand. Seeing your family being torn apart with no power to stop it hurts, and she knew it could only spiral downward from there. Then there was the visit of the principal from the Ghoul Investigator Training Academy of the First Ward, where she used a promise from her dad at the refusal of her mom to her joining this academy. A promise he told Keed that whatever she wishes to study as long as she could enter her parents will fully support her. She wasn't proud of what she did, she was a horrible person, but the CCG was essentially the government, and as long as she lacked power she could but comply, even with cold shimmering anger, unstoppable fury, and pure hatred in her heart. She knew she was manipulated into doing this, and whoever was responsible, as her days counted, she would rain hell on earth if necessary. But she will use this opportunity to grow stronger, and it's not like she was alone. The CCG's Reaper seemed to be an ally, and also probably the utter psychopath and mad woman, naturally born one-eyed ghoul Ito Yoshimura. "Here, sweetheart, you must be famished," an aged feminine voice rang out, snapping Keed out of her reverie. Turning around she was met with the brown eyes of Aoi, fear hidden deep within them. "Are you scared, Gran?" she asked the old lady, who froze for a short moment before placing the tray with a plate of homemade cookies right from the hove, warm milk chocolate, and green tea. This last part wasn't for her. Yes. You terrify me. Each time you look into my eyes I feel as if a beast was going to leap at me and reap my guts out. But you aren't a monster, the man who did this to your father was. I know that sounds corny, but you must stay strong, the old woman said, and hugged the pink-haired girl, even if her every instinct screamed at her to run. "Thank you," Keed with closed eyes mumbled almost inaudibly as she was retaining her own instinct from killing the woman behind her. "But that doesn't the fact change that I'm one." 8. First day in hell, school. Keed stared at herself in the mirror, her horns slightly longer and more pointy than before, what she came to call the awakening, for several reasons. One of them being the wake-up call of her current reality. They always had grown as she aged, that wasn't new, she even had made monthly reports to see their growth and change. She also did with her size, and she didn't particularly like being small. Anyway, her horns did grow really slowly, so in less than a week gaining nearly 2 centimeters was surprising. She wasn't exactly sure why this was happening though. Her lack of knowledge and understanding of her physiology and biology was a problem. A weakness. That's why even though it was a shitty week she focused on that aspect. So far she has noticed distinct differences between humans and ghouls beyond the obvious of her peculiar appearance and vectors. Her vectors let her feel their surroundings with incredible precision at the moment her limit was bordering on the cellular, and with enough training and experience she supposed she could go beyond. With this, the ability to phase through matters, and she has one of the best tools to explore and study others, her environment, and even herself. It was perturbing at first, but she mapped her entire body, particularly her brain. It was there she found the biggest internal difference. The first thing she noticed was her pineal gland. The size of a pea, this part of the brain found in its middle played an important and major role in biological cycles such as the sleeping cycle. For her it was the size of an egg, ridiculously more complex. It fundamentally changed how her brain functioned and looked from the other 2 hominid species. Even someone with no knowledge could tell the difference. Not forgetting in the first place that her brain was different, her status as a reincarnator and her various activities changed it far beyond what you would normally find in the head of a prepubescent girl. Then there was the connection from her horn to her brain, metaphorical tons of highly compacted nerve, blood vessels, a liquid that reminded her of cephalon-rachidian fluid, and more tissue. She also reckoned they were like antennas to her, antennae in the sense that they sent signals and let her control her vectors via means still unknown to her. They also were very sensitive. The exact opposite from before was they felt completely inert. "Today is my first day of military school." "Yay," Keed muttered in false excitement, while she put her pink hair into 2 buns around her horns, hiding them and avoiding future annoying questions. 1 hour later. At the front gate of the first academy, both behind were an academy junior school, a more or less normal high school, and then the Ghoul Investigator Training Academy where Ghoul investigators are trained. To join the second will usually need to do the first, but Keed was a very special case. Special cases need special sets of rules, liberties, and conditions, and they had many such special cases. No sane or normal people will choose this career after all, if chosen at all. Though even then Keed was a case never seen before, extremely young, not human, and very gifted on the academic spectrum. It has never happened before. A mother and her daughter could be seen while dozens upon dozens of students from teenagers to young adults walked in the wide-open front gate. "Don't worry, Mom. I will be fine," Keed reassured as she hugged her mother. She could feel her mother cry and she hated it, but it is what it is. Moving away from the death grips of a hug, the pink-haired girl smiled and waved before walking to the huge gate. She got a lot of curious looks due to her apparent age, but none stopped her until she entered. "Hey little girl, are you lost?" A voice from behind her, an adult male from the pitch, asked her with some confusion and worry. Turning around she saw a somewhat tall middle-aged bulky man with short black hair and a beard. He was dressed in a few three-piece suits and likely was a Ghoul investigator that will be an instructor, and he looked familiar. Tilting her head to the side, Keed fumbled through her bag and took the card she was given 2 days ago. "Here. Mr. H.M., Keed said while showing him her honor student card. She was quite surprised to see hints of fury in his eyes and face, then sadness as it disappeared. "Sorry if I scared you, Keed. I'm Yukinori Shinohara, a Ghoul investigator and temporary instructor here. Do you need help?" he said gently with a polite smile. Still furious as to why a kid that was barely a teen was here and was going to be trained to hunt those man-eating monsters. She was no older than his eldest son, for God's sake. She shouldn't be here, but the most horrifying part was if she was here, and an honorary student, he couldn't begin to fathom the reasons behind it. Before Keed responded, a familiar voice she didn't hear for the last 2 weeks entered her ears. Said voice caused Yukinori's demeanor to shift entirely. "Follow me," Arima said neutrally to the pink-haired girl. While she did what he asked, she was informed beforehand, this man was going to be her instructor for the better or for the worse. Honesty, she preferred to not be here at all, but what you want isn't always what is necessary for your future. That she perfectly understood. She didn't forget to say goodbye to Yukinori, who was even more confused about it all, and he was sure he wouldn't get an answer or explanation. The two moved through the compound, moving by various buildings, a library rivaling the biggest public library in Tokyo. It was almost rivaling a small town in terms of sheer size. Most of it was for various sports activities, but still. It was impressive. During this, Keed was clutching her hands to try and ignore all of the humans they passed by. Their curious glance and their simple presence were infuriating. The same one would act with a fly or a mosquito, a pest to be rid of, and what a peculiar feeling it was. It felt both oh so right and oh so wrong. Yet it was different with Arima. There was still the instinctual need to murder him, rip him apart, but it was lesser, muted, and ignorable, like a whisper. On another note, she remarked the difference in the whitening of the half-human's hair. How long does he have left, she wondered. His hair in a mix of white and blue wasn't a dye or anything. It was caused by the various health problems hybrids have. The fact humans and ghouls could procreate was quite incredible in itself. "We're here," she was interrupted. ID thought and narrowly avoided bumping into the half-human who suddenly stopped moving. She was sure he did it on purpose. In front of them was an immense blocky building, with plants growing all over its gray wall, bushes, and tall grass everywhere from the cracked cement. It looked old and was clearly abandoned for at least a few years, but it was in somewhat good condition. The door was closed by chains and a lock. Those looked new. Arima arrived at the door and snapped the metal lock with his bare hands before beckoning the somewhat shocked Keed to follow him inside. It was clean, suspiciously so. It was empty. She was confused as to why they were, but that was answered right after. With a flick of his right hand, a black sword with red pulsating veins within appeared out of his sleeve, a sword made of Quinquas metal. The next instant, with precision and power, he slashed right at Keed's neck. Her body acted on instinct before she could think anything elaborate about her shock that the sword, aimed at her neck, was cleanly cut into 5 irregularly sized parts as 4 of them flew in the direction he moved his arm, all embedding deeply wooden floor. But the very tip of the blade managed to draw a droplet of crimson-red blood from her neck as it was stopped. The CCG's Reaper observed the broken tip of the blade being flung back at him with half the speed of sound, sidestepping almost in a lazily-like manner. He dodged it. What the actual fuck? She jumped back, yelling shock, anger, and a sense of betrayal in her being. Her vectors spread out ready to snap and kill anything. A hand on her neck, the small wound healing almost immediately. Too slow, too predictable. I could have killed you right at this instant. As expected. Your training will begin today. We will test what your current limits are, Arima said calmly, his face unreadable outside of the stone mask he wore. While a great part of his mind focused on replaying the moment the blade was cut apart, it was both fascinating and terrifying. Asking how she was doing was pointless. She was smart, she wouldn't tell anyone the how of her seemingly supernatural power. But he could still deduce from the little knowledge he had, the range was limited to around 2 meters, 6 feet 6. It could cut through something as durable as Quinquas as if was nothing. However, it wasn't instantaneous, even if faster than what a normal human could ever hope to react to. She had faster regeneration, and it was only the tip of the iceberg. The future promised to be interesting and full of change. So that's how it's going to be. Keed mumbled as she rationalized what happened. She was still pissed off. She could and would have died, decapitated might she have, if she didn't react fast enough. That much was evident. He wasn't playing around. It set his character, as a monster. What he told was but plain factual truth, one that was cold and uncaring for her being and one she recognized as necessary. The future will be far from pleasant. 9. A nuclear warhead in sheep's clothing. The last few months of school for Keed were pretty fucking hard. She is a book rat, she was like that in her past too. She never was a great fan of physical activity, and that didn't change. After all, when she learned where she was, her plan wasn't to go fight the man-eating subspecies of the genre Homo with super regeneration, resilience, and strength on the battlefield. Not forgetting their personal biological and extremely versatile weapon capable of growth that could go through most metal known to man like it was paper. So she didn't really exercise all that much beyond the basics necessary to somewhat keep herself in shape, and it was mostly gymnastic from video and a basic level of self-defense from her mom, at least in the know-how as a little girl was quite limited either way, without her flesh-ripping vectors that is. Her teacher, Arima, has shown time and time again how exigent, cold, and uncaring he was when training her. He wanted the best result and his expectations were ridiculously high. And she was training/working out most of the time, as any scholarly subjects were a waste of time considering she was way beyond them, and Arima fully took advantage of this. Her being registered as a student was more of an excuse to be trained than anything. The half-human pushed her to all unconscious out of sheer exhaustion. She was to blame as his condensing and cold gaze irked her to no end, causing her teenage left to want to prove him wrong. The worst part was that she knew it was at least partially for that purpose he acted this way, which irked her even further. Without her healing factor, a weak one but one nonetheless, the constant pain and ache of her muscles would have her bound to a bed or coffin. It was simply too much for a girl entering her teen, to the point of potentially crippling or killing, but Keed wasn't a human girl. Those months with her teacher were mostly focused on endurance, which translated for the most part into aerobic exercise such as running on end until she physically couldn't anymore. It was torture, to put it mildly, but she signed for that, against her wish, but that must count for something. Part of her truly wanted to murder the man, and it's not like she lacked on occasions. One internal slash from a vector to a vital organ, and the half-human was as dead as one could get. Even if she hated her current situation to her very bones, she knew that at the moment it was better to simply gain in strength, experience, and knowledge. She knew the plot, well, a part of it which was most of seasons 1 and 2 with some bits and pieces here and there. For once she knew she shouldn't trust this very shaky base of information that was what she remembered of the canon. And that what she knew might as well be thrown out of the window, as she will cause ripples and already as but the important characters like the main character, this crazy green-haired half-ghoul chick playing as a human writer and the psycho white-haired teen with a scythe were very likely viable information. She wasn't sure what purpose Arima had in mind for her, but she wasn't going to waste time wallowing in self-pity when one of the strongest men on this planet was clearly wanting to train her and shield her from the horror the CCG could do to her. Horrors she could roughly imagine gave her motivation to push herself, and the CCG was not the biggest of problems. Other similar organizations existed in the world too, without counting the normal military of countries, people that would be interested in dissecting her, and such. It was very motivating. Power was everything, in all of its shapes. Still not enough, and you seem distracted, but that won't matter. Follow, and go take a shower before. You stink, Arima declared coolly to the pink-haired teen in front of who was lying covered in sweat on the grass. At their right was the same abandoned building where the half-human attacked Keed to test her reaction. Yeah, fuck you too, the girl thought, her body aching all over and her mind buzzing unpleasantly at the lack of hydration. She slowly stood up, and she groggily walked to her backpack, greedily drinking the water from her bottle like it was the last bottled water on earth. 20 minutes later she was dressed in regular clothing, sweatshirt, sweatpants and sneakers, all in varying degrees of purple. She preferred comfort over appearance, a fact that annoyed her mom to no end. So, she asked her teacher as they walked out of the school to what Keed assumed was Arima's car. It was only the morning and it was all unusual, but she followed suit. She knew she could trust him to some degree. We are going to Ward 13. Hunting, he said, with a hint of displeasure in his flat voice. Strange. Oh, but I don't have a weapon, and aren't I too young and inexperienced for this? And not qualified at all, she uttered, baffled by what he just said. It was one of the many wards infested with ghouls, not that all others weren't infested by other non-ghouls if she used the same logic. One of the worst, in fact, with a history of bloodshed and violence. She could see where this was going, and a big portion of her mind was absolutely thrilled about it to her mild horror, but she hid everything. The gaze she got back from Arima was clear as day. She didn't need any weapons to kill ghouls, and all other bureaucrats' problems were quite unimportant. And it clicked why he sounded displeased or had a rough understanding of it. It wasn't his choice, it seemed, an order from the higher-up probably to see what she was capable of doing, which in return made her frown, but it didn't extinguish the sheer twisted excitement she was feeling. It was intoxicating. Sometimes later down in an alley a blonde-haired man, Nika, was slowly humming as he walked. He was wearing a white suit, a confident smirk present on his face earned from a successful meeting with one of the Aogiri tree leaders, mummified girl, that let them have more resources and less restriction. It was unusual and made him suspicious about all of it, but he knew better than to refuse. He decided to not overthink this decision. The future for the White Suits gang was bright. Walking behind the blonde man on his right and left were two identical men in similar white suits, both tall, and extremely muscular with scarred faces and short black hair on their heads. Their name was respectively Geijai and Gyus, the henchmen of Naki. Me misters. Have you seen my mommy? I was hick. I think I'm lost. A voice distinctively that of a young girl resonated from behind them. Naki turned, his smile never fading, and he saw a girl barely 11 years of age. From there he could tell she neither had the smell of a ghoul nor a human, which was greatly confusing. He didn't hear her snuck behind them either, only amplifying this feeling. She had ink hair, 2 red ribbons on either side of her head, and her expression, instead of what her voice conveyed, was that of someone having found a toy to break. Her ruby red eyes flickered and locked onto his own, and a small smile found its way on her face. A smile one would normally not find on a girl her age, filled with something twisted that both felt right and wrong. The tension was rising, everything felt off about her, and he didn't like it. He didn't know what the girl was, but ultimately she was just a girl, one that made him feel unsettled for no apparent reason, and as such irritated him greatly. Turning around he hissed an order, Geijai, Gyus, you can eat her. 10, reap and tear. Geijai, Gyus, you can eat her. As soon as those words left Naki's mouth the twin made strange gurgling sounds of understanding. Their scara became black, and their iris a red nearly as intense as the girl's own. The two heavily muscled ghouls moved in perfect sync, gloved hands wide open to grab the pink-haired girl. She cowered in terror, but her eyes and smirk indicated the exact opposite. They felt something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint why this was the case. This confused the twin even further, but it didn't stop their charge. As Geijai's right and Gyuj's left hand were going to grab the pink-haired girl, then something unexpected happened. A sharp pain was felt around their respective wrists, then all feelings of their hands that tried to grab the girl completely vanished. Before their disbelieving eyes, their respective right and left hand flew off as if a monomolecular blade cut through their arms. An intense pain followed as blood spurted from the unnaturally clean cut that was already very slowly healing, their body trying to clog the hemorrhage. A simultaneous groan of pain escaped each, causing Naki to stop and slowly turn around, the smell of his henchman's blood freezing as his eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before his widening eyes. The girl's body language shifted to something more correlated with her ever-present smirk and eyes full of something that sent shivers of primal terror down the three ghoul spine. Something that shouldn't be possible. Ow wow. Sorry, not sort for your grubby man-eater's hands, it's in self-defense so you can understand how a small girl like me in this dark alley may be fearful. Let me help you to become somewhat symmetrical again. For your help though, Keed said, tone mocking to the extreme with an innocent giggle ringing out of her. It felt good, it felt amazing, it felt right. Anything else at that moment was of little importance. Another two hands flew, snapping the now handless twin back to reality, but it was too late. The next instant they lost the feeling of their legs from right to the middle of their calves. This time they let out a bona fide scream of agony as they fell to the grim ground of the alley, their blood in both stench and liquid tainting the air and concrete. Another scream escaped as they tried to crawl away using their bloody stumps at their wrist, the constantly regenerating skin and bare flesh rasping against the concrete as they did. But the girl only giggled at the sight. It was so much fun. Her very being ecstatic about it all. And how amusing was the way she twisted their arms as one would for a chicken leg popped right off from their shoulder, taking their entire spatula, the bone behind the ribs, with it, and exposing the back of their ribs in the process as it came with the skin and flesh tearing like paper. If one looked carefully, some of the internal organs could even be seen, only their biology as ghouls let them be conscious and alive as blood kept flowing in abandon. Still no Kaguns out. Am I not worth it? Are you both defective even when you have an RC level of 3800-ish or what? So sad, so despair. The pink-haired spoke with childlike interest, her moving around from the middle of her back and invisible to anybody but her. It flowed through the two's insides, uncaring if could be counted as a violation of the highest order, scanning everything up to the cellular level and not forgetting to leave grievous lacerations behind while at it on their oh-so-precious soft internal organs. The damages were to such an extent that even a ghoul of their level couldn't survive without immediate hospitalization from an expert doctor in ghoul biology. If only one such person that was close by could help with this specific kind of injury. As their diminishing scream of agony entered her ear, the pink-haired girl slammed her fist into the palm of her hand in an over-exaggerated and dramatic motion as if she solved one of the grand mysteries of the universe. Oh! Truly fascinating. I see. Poor both of you, both of your flow of RC cells of your Kaguns are blocked around your cohookus by the organs themselves. Why? Maybe caused a birth defect due to a grave mutation. High chance, it's common within your species, she spoke to herself at the end. She mumbled, but it was loud enough for everyone close to her to hear. Naki hearing those words, the clear amusement at the pain she was causing, how she was killing his two henchmen before his very eyes, Gagei and Gyuj at the moment were no more than limbless barely living torsos. The ghoul considered them as friends and brothers in all but blood. They were dying. No, they were going to die. All of it sent his mind moving from shock, comprehension, and anger to full-blown mindless fury. His eyes turned pitch black, pupils glowing red as spider web-like cracks pulsed all around them. His Kagun, a Kukiku type, pierced his right shoulder, destroying his white suit, the blue insectoid-like limb of RC cell flexing as the claw grew twice the length of the blonde ghoul's arms. Erg. I'm going to reap you fucking gut out and eat them in front of your dying gaze, he yelled, half of the words unable to be understood by Keed, who cutely tilted her head to the side in confusion at the rapidly approaching ghoul. Oh! Fascinating to see the formative and fixative stages of a Kagun in real life. The videos and paper I have couldn't quite catch the ent-bang** pros *bang star. Can't yo *bang* ct *bang*, getting you now *bang*, re. Or are you also defect *bang*, her calm amused voice was drowned by the repeated and desperate bashing of Naki against her comparatively smaller form. Each of her vectors moved instinctively to catch the Kagun's every movement, while only small consciousness movements of her 4 vectors caused the man to waste more energy with each move, only frustrating the aggrieved boss of the white suit further and further. This little game continued for a minute and a half as Naki progressively slowed down, tears flowing out of his maddened eyes as his face was contorted in a mask of anger. A squelching of metal penetrating flesh and bone resonated as faster than Naki could process in his state. His 2 barely holding in henchmen were held in front of his easily telegraphed hit, and his kukiku penetrated both of Geijai and Gyuj's heads like a hot knife through butter. Double kill, Keed thought and mentally mimicked the deep voice of those commentator voices in video games. This caused a barely audible giggle to escape her. This is why her instincts screamed at her to kill and cause pain. Just like all animals, humans and ghouls included, she craved this little droplet of dopamine that makes you feel good, and she could get them this way. This was worrying, but again at the moment, she couldn't care less. And anger, what a fascinating emotion it is, the realization of the consequences of one fit of anger even more so. When you are not directly concerned, of course, but the same goes for most things. Naki froze, his gaze completely focused on his claw and how it pierced the head of his friends, thought of rage vanishing as they muddled, transforming into incoherent gibberish as he tried and failed to process what was in front of his very eyes. No. No 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 no. This can't be real, can't be real. No no no. This didn't happen, this can't happen, he babbled incoherently, his kagun dissipating into the air as he silently fell to his knees, both his eyes back to normal but empty and unfocused. The blood of the dead twins slowly dripped on the ground and streamed on his hands and painting his white suit a dirty red. Did I break it? She said with disappointment as she snapped her finger in front of the ghoul's eyes, her vectors working behind as she cut the unique kaguns of the twins, and cleanly displaced the 2 apple-sized organs, the kahuku, into their respective transparent seal bags before putting them in her backpack. No blood was spilled into her belongings as much as her body thought of the smell as very, very pleasant, not the appetizing kind though. It was a pain to clean, and her mom didn't need to know she started this young. Sighing at the man going around in circles denying reality, vectors moving, she mowed his internal organs from the chest cavity to the ventral cavity in a whole fell swoop. Except for the kahuku, this led to the ghoul seizing up as he died, mouth puking unrecognizable pieces of tissue and blood. His own species' biology rendered the entire process agonizing to the extreme as the body tried in vain to heal itself. It felt like scratching an itch, an impossible itchy one that kept going and going and going on. 11. A tool. Keed looked at her works, and she felt content. On one side she knew she should feel horrified by what she just did, or at the bare minimum feel perturbed in some way. And she found she didn't and couldn't care. Turning her head at the sound of expensive shoes clopping on the blood, she saw the cold and calculating gaze of Arima and could already feel the critics falling. Yes, I know what you are going to say, I wasted too much time and should have killed before they could have even realized I was there. I was late by half a microsecond at one point. And I didn't use much of your lesson, the pink-haired girl spoke while her vectors moved and the blonde ghoul's kahuku held invisibly in the air was moved in front of her fascinated gaze as she studied the still pulsing and very much living organ. Indeed, however, those are for later and will be translated into tripling the amount of exercise. Keed's eyes thinned and a groan escaped her at that, but little did she know it would have happened either way. Arima then continued. You have eliminated 1 S-rated ghoul and 2 A-rated ones known for their sync and teamwork. You won in a 3 versus 1 while being 10 years, with no injuries or struggle while doing so unharmed by our standard. Going past all recorded cases expectations for your special case, he finished, his eyes focused on the barely visible handprint of the things that held the kahuku in the air. It's the blondie, right? Are they supposed to be this weak? She asked incredulously. She knew the RC factor of said ghoul, but this factor, while related to strength, wasn't obligatory the case for how the CCG rated them, from C, B, B+, A+, A+, S, S, S+, SS, SS, SS+, and SSS. Ultimately S, while not the strongest, was far, far from the weakest. It just was unfair for a simple ghoul to be able to kill her in a direct confrontation. But life was unfair and frankly, she wasn't going to complain long as it goes her way. Keed didn't know her exact limit in terms of power behind what her vectors could stop. Bullets were no problem, but again small caliber was that, small caliber. Arima nicked her neck because he was extremely fast and strong, to such a point he could trash around the strongest of ghoul humans and all in between presently alive in direct combat while armed. Yes. Keed nodded at that. The kahuku within her vectors was suddenly activated by one curious inside tap from a vector finger, and the shape-shifting flow of muscle morphed into a dark red claw with a deep blue side as it hardened. "What would you want to do with this?" Arima said, unable to hide his surprise from the horned girl as she played around with the floating kagun, flexing it as she wished. He really wanted to ask, but he knew it will be pointless as the girl either would change the subject, or ignore him, but that didn't stop him from studying what she as the first individual of this new species was capable of, those psychic powers being at the forefront. "Could I keep one? Does this mean Quinquas? If so, can you bring me to the laboratory where they make them?" Her excitement was overflowing, and she nearly squealed, but she calmed instantly as she nearly busted the delicate ghoul organ in her vectors. "Yes, for all," he answered calmly, pausing as he was amused by the sudden enthusiasm of the girl. One could forget she was psychotic, but not now. It's getting late and you need to go back to your home. The same day in a large room, a small woman wearing only a red and dirty cloak, her entire body covered in bandages. Even then the inhuman and disturbing smile was plainly visible through it as she madly giggled, looking with fascination at the small and old blocky TV video that was given to her by the CCG Reaper not even 2 hours ago. It was truly fascinating how this pink-haired girl could do such a thing, the sheer powerlessness of her toys, and how she did as she pleased, particularly how she manipulated Nika into killing his own brothers in all but blood in a fit of uncontrolled rage to just break him mentally. She had taste and style, a diamond in the rough for death and destruction. If only she was an orphan. If only. Oh. Yes, that might work, but it's too dangerous and I don't want her as an enemy, this young and already this strong, and neither do I want her dead. Ah, why do I worry so much? The one behind the doves will do the work for me. The one-eyed owl, Ito Yoshimura, exploded into a full-blown cackle at this very likely future. The Organization V wanted the status quo between ghouls and humans to stay forever, and this little girl was one of the few ways it could be utterly broken or kept. She was unique. Sadly, Ito knew with how good they are at fucking things up, her existence being the prime example, it was only a matter of time before they did something that will inevitably result in Keed stopping playing their games. Or Keed will do it by herself. At the same time, within the CCG's headquarters in the chairman's office, an old man with long hair, thick eyebrows, and a long beard, all in white due to his age. The air around him was tense as his gaze bore into the screen in front of him. He is Tsuneyoshi Washu, the chairman of the CCG, patriarch of the Washu clan and a ghoul of the purest bloodline within his own clan. Various points were marked and studied as the ghouls in it were killed, again, and again by this recently discovered creature named Keed Izumi, or Lucy the First Diclonius, as one of the ones studying her blood named her. He trusted his bastard half-human of a son to take care of her training and study her, from her personality to her capabilities and every detail regarding her. And terminate her if his son deems it necessary or he orders it. She was a very interesting specimen, one that could be used to enrich the Washu bloodline, but the opportunity for this to happen didn't present itself, and she was a bit too young for such a thing. Not that he cared for age, he cared only if she biologically apt to bring offspring. And she was more useful than she is, not counting her peculiarity with her negative RC factor that still held strange effects on RC cells and could lead to the unforeseen unwanted event used to enrich the bloodline. He was hesitating about what should happen to her when she will pass this year and became the youngest agent. But this answer will come with time. Tsuneyoshi knew he might be playing with fire, but he was wise enough to realize this: she was young and held no enmity but toward lower ghouls. The one that killed her human father. As intelligent as she supposedly was, she was but a raw piece of metal to be forged into a tool, the CCG tool, and by extension, his tool, and the Washu's tool, be it of her own will or by force. 12. Quinquas. 4 weeks later, within one of the many laboratories of the CCG, a pink-haired girl could be seen walking excitedly along the white corridor while behind her was a tall man with whitening blue hair. People were moving at a brisk pace as they moved toward what they needed, some paused and blinked in confusion at Keed but none interpreted her as Kisho was close. "Thank you. This will aid me for my next hunt," Kuriomato, a middle-aged man with long disheveled white hair spoke to a brown-haired young man with a bowl cut who just gave him a metal briefcase, a Quinqua. Turning around, the middle-aged ghoul inspector saw a pink-haired girl in a white dress and blinked in visible utter confusion. The girl on her side couldn't help thinking that this man had a bit more than a few screws loose, a common occurrence in this line of work, one that wasn't hidden and one of the reasons regular everyday people not from this had a lot of prejudice toward them, such as her mom. He was quite important to the original plot if she remembered, not that she cared besides the fact she instantly didn't like him and that she found that he has one head and 4 limbs too much. Admittedly something not unique to him as it was the consensus with humans, but he clearly stood out. "Well, hello little girl, are you low so this your student the rumor spoke about?" Curio's voice turned professional and he straightened as the higher-ranked half-human instructor followed suit and nodded but nothing more. "What? This girl? I knew she was young but not this young. She can barely be considered a teen." The brown-haired man who gave Curio his Quinqua spoke aloud in abject shock for everyone to hear. "Calm down Dr. Asaki, wasn't Keed's information given with the mutated Kahuku and her recommendation of weapons?" Arima asked, calming the doctor down before looking around for the girl in question only to notice she slipped away and was entering one of the rooms, one that needed card access, which she didn't have. "Someone must have forgotten. This is where the Quinquas are kept," Keed mumbled as her vectors moved in the Quinqua steel reinforced wall and electronic system, creating a false signal that let her fool the system and open the door. She could cut a hole through it, but that wouldn't be the best of ideas. Observing the hundreds of briefcases, she explored around for 20 seconds before she found one with her name tag on. Picking it up, she noticed it was quite heavy for her. With anticipation she opened it and 2 metal sticks were neatly kept in the black styrofoam. Studying one of them, she pressed one of the buttons. A shock similar to static electricity was felt, and from each of the handle sides crimson-red flesh grew at breakneck speed until a chakram of metal and flesh 3/4 her size was in her hand. A giddy smile formed as she repeated the process with the others. They were surprisingly light and absolutely ridiculous for a weapon to use with your hands. They were cumbersome and impractical. As she deactivated them, the same doctor who was shocked to see her in the first place was here. "Good afternoon Dr. Asaki, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I must say your paper on the use of Quinqua steel for prosthetics uses an implant to protect vital organs was fascinating. If only a great amount of RC cells in the current RC solution to make this steel didn't have adverse effects on humans." "I would like to talk about this later," Keed exclaimed while putting each of the sides of the handle to one side, causing a click to be heard. Activating the newly fused 2 Quinquas, a round throwing shield 75% bigger than the earlier chakra but the edge just as sharp. The flesh was now of a deep marine, almost black sheen. A humming sound could be heard from the blade all around, the veins coursing the shield pulsing with her heartbeat, and spikes grew out in almost the shape of a maw. Keed was only stopping it from squashing herself thanks to her vector. "Ah! Impressive for someone this young to know of this, and it's surprising for a future investigator to be interested in this. Yes, if you want. Anyways, as you can see, this is your Quinquas." The 2 Kahuku were very unusual, 3,956 in RC factors each, and are genetically identical. This led to an interesting result with your extremely advanced ideas such as the fusion. "That is only possible due to this." Dr. Asaki paused while before his very eyes, the shield was spun around and then disassembled back into 2 chakrams. Quinquas are generally weapons made of Quinqua steel, generally, as the Quinquas used by ghoul investigators are built with the Kahuku of a ghoul around it and shaped in a way similar to how bonsai are grown but on another level of complexity. Each was unique, and even the smaller ones were worth more than the regular Japanese salaryman/corporate livestock gained in 5 years. It was ironic that an organization run by ghouls put such an obscene amount of resources into killing ghouls, but what does Keed know? Narcissism and insanity run hand in hand. They are unique from their design being based on chakram, very light, extremely resistant to heat, cold and various hazards, capable of cutting through steel and ghouls, but the truly unique factor is their self-repairing capability while in direct contact of ghoul or human blood. Don't ask how I found it. Another point. This fusion adds each of the Quinquas total of RC cells, which results in an RC factor of 7,912. Making it in theory extremely resistant and sharp. And potentially unstable. To transform 2A class Kahuku into something nearing SS. You've got the jackpot for your 2 starting Quinquas, he trailed off, and the girl nodded at this. 7,912 is an insane amount, with the upper limit of Ghoul being at 8,000 by the CCG records, as it can be higher and it's more on quantity than quality, so no bioflame or bioelectricity like Arima's stupid fucking lance, Keed thought, remembering the first time the half-human used this Quinqua to torture her. She wasn't immune to electricity coursing through the air, it directly passed through her shield. At the moment, it was very unpleasant on a lot of points, yet she was thankful to the half-human for pointing this out before anything grave happened, such as her death. It was a weakness, and a very big one. She didn't stop air and fine particles with what could travel in it from reaching her, such as heat and electricity. Her vector shield she had around her was not impermeable, or she would have died of asphyxia already, but it pointed to obvious and exploitable weaknesses that she needed to get rid of. A void between the air inside and outside was one of the solutions, one she didn't exactly know how to do as of yet. She had her vectors unlocked for a short time. Yet they constantly grew in size, speed, precision, and strength every second of every day, slowly but surely. She could feel a 5th one will come out soon, the first new vector of many. It was intoxicating in a sense. Combined with her growth in knowledge, experience, and physical strength, she was going to milk every drop of value she could from her current situation. As the human continued to explain the 2 Quinquas, she noticed training black dummies on the other side of the room. Grabbing both of her chakrams with her vectors while mimicking that she still held them normally, instantly making them weightless to her. Faster than the untrained human eyes could comprehend, she spins both Quinquas at around 100 turns per second, the air humming loudly. Her long pink hair flowed chaotically before she threw them at a bit more than half the speed of sounds. Air was blown away as the first chakram bisected the metal dummy before digging multiple matters into the wall. The second came and cut into the still flying bisected part of the dummy to ultimately follow its twin as it dug into the wall. Damn. Wonder how much damage the shield would do to a crowd, she thought randomly to one of the things she hated the most in Tokyo, the crossroads, particularly late in the evening. Too many people, be it humans and ghouls, in proximity. It gives a genuine primal urge to commit manslaughter and let it go. And that sums it up. Shit, those were made out of Quinqua steel. Makes more sense how you got those ghouls now. What would you like to name them? Dr. Asaki asked. He couldn't care less about the fact the wall was greatly damaged and a dummy was lost. 13. Antiku. In a dark alley border between the 19th and 20th wards. Ha ha ha. This is awesome, Keed laughed, jumping with the help of her vectors from one wall to another, the chakram flying in the air before embedding itself in a wall. The ghoul in the middle that showed her lower half being cut off from her navel down below could but scream in both terror and agony. Ah, shush, it's not even a truly mortal injury. You aren't a human, woman, she continued, landing softly next to the ghoul, whose guts tangled with the Quinqua and stopped her from crawling away. PL please, I have a dash. The ghoul's plight ended up interrupted by the pink-haired girl. A what? A son, a daughter, a sick family member? Who knows? Who cares? Certainly not me or the human and ghoul's children sold to the black market, not that I play the moral high ground here. I'm quite the monster myself. It's just funny to see you in such a pathetic state, trying to play the pity card. Double-faced piece of trash. Elena, a male voice echoed from behind the girl, who simply took out her chakram. The now-named Elena jumped at the opportunity, the kagun exploding from her left lower back, yet what she received was a slap that could fold metal into her head. The result was as gory with pieces and bits as one might expect. Pressing a button, the Quinqua became but a metallic handle. No, the man yelled, his kagun emerging from his left shoulder, and what answered him was the pink-haired girl rushing straight at him with an innocent smile. One of her vectors flowed through his body, grabbing the kakuho, while two others cut open an exit for the vital organ. This caused the ghoul to fold backward and cry in agony before convulsing on the ground as more of his organ sound were wrecked by Keed, all the damage being done with precise cuts. Another ghoul jumped at her from above, a yell of anguish escaping at the top of her lung. Not even looking, Keed hummed at the tune of the music blasting in her ears through her headphones. A vector latched against the ghoul's neck, causing her to violently stop and panic. You do not tell your position during a surprise attack by yelling at your opponent, dum-dum. Ninjas are supposed to be silent and stealthy. Not that it would have worked, but at least put in a modicum of effort. Keed berated the girl that was 2 or 3 years older than her with this same ever-present innocent smile contrasting deeply with ruby-red eyes that told she lacked empathetic capabilities or simply didn't care. The remark was due to the old and dirty Naruto t-shirt. Anime existed here as well. Predatory man-eating creatures weren't going to stop humans in that aspect. Please don't cry, it was inevitable. Your parents played and lost. Not only that, but they didn't even know to whom they sold the children, but didn't even hide all that well. She huffed in annoyance at that. Honestly, she didn't even know where to truly begin to look for the one responsible for her dad's death. It was a doctor, that was certain, the one that would change Kaneki into an artificial half-ghoul, being the primary suspect. But she didn't know who it was or what hospital he was in. But there was no need to be hasty. Do you know what dismemberment is? She rhetorically asked, 4 vectors each grabbing a limb, and she pulled. Like a doll, each of the limbs was popped off, the bone and ligament first, followed by muscle, then the skin. The natural healing factor of ghouls only multiplied the pain, and their capacity to stay conscious while extreme physical and mental stress only added salt to the injury. All the while cries of agony echoed even as the now dismembered teenage girl fell to the ground, Keed dodging her by stepping leisurely backward. Not a speck of blood over her dress. She did not deign to give the failed ninja any more of her time. She crushed the ghoul's windpipe and spine at 3 places, took out the kakuho, and ultimately the major arteries were severed. Weak, malnourished, and above average RC factor for the 3, if a bit more for their adopted daughter. Not surprising, Keed mumbled pensively, storing Reap next to tear in her metallic backpack with the picture of a red panda she was wearing backward. It had been a few weeks since she got her first pair of Quinquas, which she very originally named Reap and Tear, unusual weapons for someone even more unusual. She did have quite a few kills during that short period. Now with the family of children traffickers it was at 26. She was very prolific. The fact it was here was very unusual for ghouls, and with access to the public camera from her mom, without the latter knowing of course, and also the CCG, she had a lot of view on what was going on. She played the role of a good little slave with a hate boner for ghouls quite well. Know that it wasn't partially true on the hate part, but it isn't exclusively for ghouls. Hey! Old man, can we get to that cafe I notified you about earlier? All that blood made me peckish. Keed spoke as the old man in question, Arima, arrived with an expression as cold and disapproving as ever, but the small nod indicated it was a yes. Of course, the girl didn't forget to take the kakuhos. And so 30 minutes later Keed with Arima behind were in front of a small pleasant building where a sign reading Antiku could be seen. Ah, inconspicuous little cafe full of ghouls, she thought, pushing the door she entered. Not waiting for Arima, she climbed the stair. She opened another door, and the soft ring of a bell was heard. Welcome to Antiku. What may I help you with? A blue-haired young woman greeted the 10 or so pink-haired girl that entered. Tuka was puzzled as something immediately made her feel something was off. The girl didn't have any smell, be it human or ghoul, both had a very distinct smell. It was how ghouls recognized one another in society mostly. And this girl had none at all, not even from the fabric of her clothes. It was as if on that spectrum she didn't exist, and that was disturbing. Miss. Are you alright? Your stare is making me uncomfortable, Keed spoke, polite and overall acting her age, but it was that acting that snapped Kuta back to reality. Then Arima entered and she froze. Ah, my excuse, she hasn't felt well since this morning. It's the midterm exam after all. I hope you can forgive her misbehavior, little lady. What would you like to have from my humble establishment? an old man with a warm smile and clothes deflated the situation as he spoke. 14. Teacher and student quality time. Why is he here? And with a little girl. She is strange too. Not a ghoul but not human. Is this one of the kids from this sordid place called the Sunlit Garden? Yoshimura thought calmly as he showed the CCG Reaper and the pink-haired girl. Instantly he connected the duo to the rumor that started a few months ago. Yet he stayed calm and didn't show any external change. There was no reason to panic. He was with his life and age past this innate reaction, even if he truly understood how dangerous the man was. What would the little miss want? He asked Keed, who looked down at the menu for a long second. Going over the coffee with a frown, she directly chose a simple hot chocolate. And for you, mister? He asked again, and Arima decided on a black coffee to the unhidden disgust of Keed. Walking back to the counter, the old ghoul spoke to his employee, a male ghoul with a pompadour named Enji Koma. Ah yes, it will be done swiftly, he responded nervously, eyes switching from his boss to the two customers. Yoshimura smiled and gently put a hand on his shoulder in encouragement before walking away. Very nervous now, are we? Not like we are going to do anything, Keed thought, very much amused with the ghoul at the bar. There was eye contact and she smiled, waving at him excitedly, seemingly calming him down. Then she took her phone, one she bought herself from money she permanently borrowed from her targets/prey/toys after she killed them. Phone of which she fiddled with an app that gave the position of people with a phone nearby, something she coded herself. She wasn't much as interested in technology as in biology, but learning basic programming was easy, particularly when you start young and are gifted and also had the bonus of memories from one's past life. Her plan before everything else was to become a world-renowned scientist expert in multiple domains, informatic being one of them. She will simply forget the official part of it all, as clearly the chance to get any PhD was dead. Back to the app, it was a still in progress but very useful tool. The fact nobody per her knowledge had thought of it before surprised her, but again, here people have different priorities, and technology was at some point underestimated. The world here was just as insane as the one when she was a human male, but not the same kind of insane. Social media weren't as popular and people needed to be constantly vigilant, be it ghouls or humans. As the third party, of course, she was going to take advantage of this. It collected data from the internet, social media, and musics. Last time connected all of these kinds of things put hidden in those 100 pages paragraphs. People clicked yes without a second thought. Evidently, it wasn't very legal, not that she even bothered to learn the laws in deep detail. And with that, she could very roughly deduce with another algorithm which was more likely a human or which more likely was a ghoul. Ghouls, even good ones, needed human flesh, also why a lot of such good ghouls often pass through areas with high suicide rates. It was with this kind of data she could have an idea about the species of people. Of course, one without phones or rich ones that could buy human meat from a distance was excessive, if impossible to know without backgrounds check or her being close. But nothing was perfect. It was still in its infancy, limited by her resource, time, and get other more important projects such as getting stronger. You seem to greatly enjoy playing with your device, Arima criticized with a barely hidden glare. It hardly earned a reaction from the girl, if a careless shrug and half-lidded gaze of annoyance. Yes, and? Are you going to increase the intensity of my training again? And was searching for an excuse again, she uttered with boredom, being as insufferable as she possibly could, this time earning a visible reaction from the half-human in the form of a deep crease of his brows. I won. But at what price? Heh, who cares, it's a problem for future me, she thought, knowing in a few days she would curse herself, but she will still do it again. Very childish, but not like really cared, as fundamentally she still was one. Mental age depended on your physical age too. Enji arrived in front of the duo, a saucer with a hot drink in each. He was internally shocked by how normal they were talking to one another. Here is your command, dear customer, may you have a nice drink. He gave their order to the two, then bowed slightly before walking away, a bit more briskly than usual, heart racing in his heart, almost bursting out. The man's behavior didn't go unnoticed by Arima, who narrowed his eyes. At first he thought this was a unique case with the girl and that he scared her for X or Y reasons, but now, please. I don't want blood in my hot chocolates, and they are children and innocents. After a sip of her chocolate, Keed stopped any bloodshed from happening, but her words basically confirmed the half-human guess that it was an establishment of a ghoul. He knew she could tell if someone was a human ghoul or any in between. He didn't know how she did it, likely with her strange psychic ability. Anyway, the fact she said this surprised him and children and innocent, he internally scoffed, amused by her statement. The only kills she did were in self-defense or a surprise attack on a ghoul, but he was certain she wouldn't hesitate to end humans' lives, innocent or not. If she realized how far gone she was, that he wasn't sure. She was like him in many aspects, a born monster in every facet of the words. And he was only making her better at what she was inherently best at. But the current world couldn't continue to stay like this. In another room of the same building, Tuoka was sitting on a chair, hands trembling, while Ishimura prepared her a cup of coffee, the special ingredient being a cube of sugar composed of ground human's bones. "Is this man who I think he is?" she asked, terrified by who she just saw. The fact Yoshimura appeared outwardly calm didn't really help. "Yes, Tuka. He is, but he doesn't know we are what we are. It's not the first of you had to deal with either. He is no different. It's normal to react this way. You can rest, and here, take this, it would help you relax," Yoshimura said, slightly opening his eyes, his ever-present kakugan and gentle smile making her breathe deeply as she tried to calm herself down from her short meeting with the equivalent of the Grim Reaper. 15. A puppy. Ding. The soft ring of the Antiqua's doorbell echoed as it was opened by a thin man in his 30s with straight black hair. Behind him was a brown-haired woman of the same age, and holding her sleeve was a small 10-years-old girl with the same but shorter hair and a headband with pink sakura flower. All in all, a happy family. An entire family of ghouls, and the girl looked familiar, Keed internally remarked as she sipped her chocolate, appreciating the taste and how warm it was. It was worth it to get here just for that. The gaze of the pink-haired girl didn't go unnoticed as the other girl in question looked behind and froze while her parents continued on. She didn't freeze out of fear or anything but surprise, then she sniffed the air and kept her eyes widened. Strange. Hypersensitivity, or does she think she is a dog? Keed thought, waving at the girl. Arima next to her looked down in curiosity but didn't say anything. This action had a reaction, but not the one Keed expected. It was more along the line of panic born out of shyness, and so the Diclonius decided to approach. "Hello there, my name is Keed, and what might be yours?" Keed enthusiastically said, an amiable smile on her face to the brown-haired girl, having moved the short distance in seconds. Immediately Keed noticed she was smaller than her by a few centimeters, to her annoyance, as both were of similar age, and she did a discreet surface-level scan as well. Privacy was but a suggestion to Keed, the only limit was her morals, which she was one of the few aspects she found herself lacking in. Good thing she was too young for now to suffer the wrath of estrogens, but she couldn't lie to herself, as she knew it would be soon, considering she will soon be 11 years old, and she didn't know what her species had in store for puberty. The only constant was that there would be blood. 2 kaguns, double ukaku and bikaku, 2 types of RC cell. Very high RC factor. A chimera. Incredible. It's her. I vaguely remember, the Diclonius thought. This confirmed this was a character from the anime manga, and quite an important one at that, but that last part she didn't care about. A chimera is the offspring of 2 ghouls in possession of 2 distinct RC types and in possession of both. Something excessively rare. In fact, the only reason it wasn't the rarest was that the natural condition for a human and a ghoul to procreate was nigh impossible, and as such natural one-eyed ghouls were miracles. Powerful and mentally unstable miracles, but miracles nonetheless, not that much different from her on those points. The only major difference was that she was born from a pure-blooded human couple, both with a low RC factor. In any case, ghouls were a species born out of humans to prey on them. Her being born with a natural inclination and instincts to kill, both with humans at the forefront, was probably saying something. She wasn't superstitious, but souls or an equivalent existed, as well as a higher being. If her presence wasn't enough proof, but by all means, she couldn't give less of a fuck. With one exception, being grateful she was reincarnated, but that was all, if there was any intervention from such hypothetical beings in the first place. "Ah. My name is Hanami Fuiguchi, I'm Finny, and how are you?" The newly named Hanami spoke faster than her mouth could keep up in a burst of nervousness that earned a snicker from Keed. "I'm sorry if I scared you." "Nice to meet you, Hanami," the pink-haired girl excused herself with a cute tilt of the head. No, that's fine, and nice to meet you as well. Why do you smell strange? The chimera said shyly but at the same bluntly to Keed, who looked at her in visible confusion. Huh? As in bad? Keed asked, but it was more playing around than anything. This remark wasn't new, but it was interesting that the ghoul girl noticed it from such a distance. She knew she didn't exactly smell human, if at all, besides the one from home, not because she could tell the difference but because it was told numerous times to her face when she played with her toys, ghouls. And how animals wild or not acted around her, the last being quite funny to her as it made it seem like she was some kind of utterly psychotic Disney princess, and also that her kill count was way smaller than some of them. It makes sense as the nose of ghoul is very keen, almost on par with dogs, a very apt comparison for most even if it insults dogs, and since they were prone to a lot of mutations with the higher RC factor in their body, a unique case like Hanami with an enhanced sense made sense. Doing a quick scan one more time, Keed indeed notes the greater concentration of olfactory nerve compared to regular ghoul. It was greater by a factor of 5, the girl likely had a better sense of smell than some of the best bloodhounds out there. Keed didn't know if it was both a curse or a blessing. No. You smell good. No, I didn't mean that but. Arg. No, it's just completely different to anyone or anything else, she half blurted and half mumbled out, panic clear in her every action, feature, and voice. Socializing may be a necessity but not like I would be much better off with my old life. Though she is adorable like a puppy face planting on a pillow, the Diclonius self remarked, she wasn't a social butterfly either, her homeschooling not having fixed that, but that didn't stop her from acting like one. Nah, it isn't a problem, I understand. I'm pretty unique after all, and thanks for the compliment, if quite a unique one to say to someone you've just met. Let's talk again sometime in the future, Keed said with a smile, tugging her lips. She moved her hand and with a flick of her fingers by some sort of unknown magic a folded piece of paper that wasn't there before appeared and she gave it to the fumbling Hanami. I must go or my teacher is going to complain again. See ya, the pink-haired girl said her goodbye in a sing-song tone, hoping away back toward Arima. Doing magic tricks with literal magic hands was as easy as breathing. Hanami, left utterly confused and baffled by what happened, looked down at the light blue paper in her left hand for some time before unfolding. She read, even if the handwriting left to be desired, she could still tell it was an email and a phone number with a little message at the end. Keep this a secret between us, okay? If you don't, it doesn't matter, but I trust you on that.